Hey guys, it's Sarah from Just My Typewriter, and I'm back with another typewriter repair. I actually did a repair this time and it worked. So I have been trying to buy fewer and fewer typewriters, but it's becoming increasingly more difficult to put off buying a typewriter when I run into ones that are really good prices. I have a couple places where I go to typically pick up typewriters in my new area. I really like flea markets, and I ran into a flea market in New Jersey called the Golden Nugget Flea Market. I did purchase a Brother variant machine from here last fall, and I got it for $5 off of someone's table. It was in pretty good condition. It was a really easy clean and a pretty interesting typewriter that I did then give to a friend. I went again in the springtime and I picked up another typewriter. Now, typically when I am purchasing machines, I really have this criteria of it has to be under $25, something I don't already own, and the third part of that is that I really want machines that already are in good condition or are already working. I really don't like to do a lot of involved repair. I like quick cleaning. That's kind of my niche when it comes to typewriter repair, but I typically pass on machines that I don't feel comfortable or confident in that I could fix. However, every once in a while, I kind of feel the need to purchase these machines when somebody talks me into it. And I got talked into this one hard. I was walking through this flea market. I hadn't seen any other typewriters really the whole day. And on the last row, on the last table, there was this Remington Streamliner typewriter from the 1960s and 70s. I have been looking for one of these. I love the color of them. Obviously, I have a blue typewriter problem. I think the design is kind of interesting, this very streamlined look that we get from the 60s and 70s in typewriters, but I've never found one in the wild that I could actually purchase until today. I found this typewriter. I went to go try the keys a little bit and it just zoomed across the carriage. So clearly it wasn't stopping in the escapement for each space. Now I knew that this could be one of a couple things. The first thing I thought was maybe this could be a cleaning issue, right? Something gunked up the escapement so there isn't something that's stopping it every single tooth of your carriage. And so that might just need a quick clean or a flushing out. And that's a pretty easy fix to have. But it also could be something much worse. I've had this problem before on my Smith Corona Corsair. My nightmare machine, this had an actual broken loose dog and rigid dog on the escapement, which meant that there was no little arm stopping each one of those teeth every time you advance the carriage, and I had to find a replacement for that. So I knew it was either going to be a very easy fix or a very difficult fix, and I wasn't sure I was willing to take the risk. The guy had wanted, I think, $30, which I was gonna pass on. I offered 10, I think, and then we met in the middle at 15. So I picked up this typewriter for 15 bucks. Then he put the case topper on and it didn't stick, so he had to tie it together with string. So a few problems immediately emerged with this model. And then I took it home. I had just finished fixing the Bling typewriter, so I was feeling kind of confident in my typewriter repair, and I was immediately caught off guard by how to take apart this machine. No clue. Now, the Remington Streamliner had a couple different variations throughout the years. It came in the original 30s and 40s body style from Remington. Now, this would look more like your typical black typewriter. It had your regular keyboard on it, and it looked like a typical machine in the 30s and 40s variation. Based on some of the ads that I found from this area, in the 40s it was below a deluxe model, but it still had some features. It came in only one font size, Pica. It also had a bicolor ribbon, non-glare keys, and the finish on the 30s and 40s version was described as coming in a black Japan finish. I'm not really sure what that is. It just looks like a glossy black typewriter.
Editor's note, I know it's pica, and I continue to say it wrong every time. I'm sorry.
And of course this then advances. It goes away for a little while through the 50s, but comes back in the 60s and 70s in a newly designed body type. Now the 60s and 70s version is advertised again as being a little bit more of the cheaper model in the line, again below a deluxe. And it does have a few features listed here in the ad. The first is that it's listed as having 84 characters on the keyboard and features a cyclic case that won't crack or chip or dent. Now I had to look this up because I never heard of this before, a cyclic case. Not even sure if I'm saying that right. But what I eventually found is this is actually a type of plastic, and cyclic is the trademark name for this plastic. So it's ABS plastic, which stands for, oh boy, acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. So it's made out of plastic. And what's interesting about this is they also said that there was an advantage to making it out of plastic because you won't have any cracking or chipping in your paint as well, which is something you would have on machines that are coated in a powder coat finish paint or a typically painted typewriter. Having the plastic the color of the typewriter avoids ever running into that dreaded chipping situation. But typically, collectors look at plastic typewriters as a little bit on the lower end of typewriter models. Because they're made of plastic, they're not as heavy, they don't weight themselves down very well. They also are prone to breaking, so the cases on these can break pretty easily because they're made of plastic, and they can crack as you're taking them apart. So what was a selling point in the 1960s is actually something we as collectors look at as kind of a mark of a cheaper typewriter. But what's interesting is that Remington did make a lot of typewriters during the 60s and 70s that used a very similar body type to this Streamliner and just swapped out some of the features. So my Remington, for example, here doesn't have a ribbon color selector switch, which means it only types in one color of ribbon. Other models that were made around the same time do feature some of these additional switches on the outside. Some examples of this would be the Graduate or the 1040. They have that same body shape to them, same construction, but they just add those additional features. I also ran into this wonderful article by the Oz Typewriter blog, and I use this as a resource a lot because I find it so informative. He looked at different types of Remington models, specifically the 1040, and at one point those were made out of heavier materials. They were built a little better, and as time went on, they became more plasticky. And so he examined two different models of the 1040, and he also looked at torpedo models in this article because they were similar construction to the Remingtons. So it's interesting to see as typewriter history kind of moves forward, how companies combined or use similar designs. Mine is also marked as a Sperry Rand. Sperry Rand? Yeah, Sperry Rand. So it's that Remington Rand Sperry typewriter kind of mishmash of branding and models as you get later into typewriter history. In my research, I also found this very funny video of someone reviewing their Remington typewriter, and they did a case test where they took the ribbon covers off of a few models of their typewriters and then tried to put them back on blindfolded and timed themselves, and I thought it was hilarious, and this guy doesn't have very many views, so I've linked his video down below if you'd like to see his review of his Remington Streamliner. Oz Typewriter blog also had an article mentioning how this Remington Streamliner was designed by Carl Sundberg, who was a noted typewriter designer and also industrial designer from this era. He worked on some IBM machines, and then eventually he designed a lot of the typewriters made out of Holland for Remington that were made out of this more plastic body style. So things like the 1040 and the Monarch and the Envoy and a lot of other ones that I can't remember. So that's a little history on this late 60s, early 70s Remington Streamliner. I do like this model, but I'm drawn to the aesthetics of it, not so much the construction, because the construction tricked me as I was taking it apart. So I brought this typewriter home, placed it on my table, and started to take it apart. Anytime I'm cleaning a typewriter, I do like to dismantle it as far down as I can go without getting too complicated, just so I can get closer and a better clean on the inside of this machine. I did my typical attempts at trying to take this apart. The case cover, the top of the machine, popped right off, so I was able to just kind of easily remove that. The bottom was just screwed in with a couple of screws, so I also took that off, and I was able to kind of clean out the main body of the typewriter. However, it still wasn't clicking in space by space, which meant I had to look at the escapement. Now I could see the part of the escapement that wasn't in the right place from the bottom, but I couldn't figure out how to access it from the top. Typically, this is where you would take out your platen and your paper tray and take out most of your carriage so you could see what's kind of clicking in underneath. But it took me a few weeks to figure out how to just take this machine apart. Machines in the 60s and 70s have a few more tricks up their sleeves. They're not necessarily designed to be taken apart as easily as something like a Royal Clyde Deluxe or a Smith Corona 5 series. They are more complicated because, again, we're being manufactured in other countries. We're also designed to be more lightweight, more portable, more interesting designs. And we're also working with plastic, which very easily chips and cracks. So there are a lot more factors kind of going into the construction of a machine like this. I started by trying to take out the platen, which did take me a few tries. After that, I had to figure out how to take out the paper tray. Now, the paper tray is kind of that thing that is a swoop kind of shape that takes paper in and feeds it through your rollers. I had a lot of trouble getting this out of the machine, and that's because it was attached with E-clips, which I have found on machines before, specifically the Corsair Deluxe, which is a similar era to something like this. They have E-clips on their carriage arm. It's a little clip that holds something in place. I didn't know to look for that on this machine, so it took me a really long time to find these on the back of the carriage. I found them, and I was able to remove those to take out the paper tray. Then I was kind of stuck with the top part of the carriage underneath the paper tray. I could see very clearly that the machine was clicking in place, but I couldn't figure out what was missing. I tried a bunch of things. Eventually, I just had to unscrew the bottom of this carriage to take it out. And I thought there was going to be something that held the top carriage part to the body of the machine. I was wrong. Once I removed those screws, I just had to lift it out of there. And then I was kind of faced with a new problem. The escapement in this machine is different than any other escapements I've really encountered before. It's actually kind of similar looking in my brain to like the bottom of a Brother typewriter because it's all laid out. It's not stacked on top of each other like you might have in a Smith Corona machine or a Royal Clyde Deluxe. But I looked at this and it just looked like something was missing. There was no connection point between the point at the top of the escapement and the backspace key. And it looked like I was missing something. And I posted on all of the Facebook groups, I posted on the maintenance group, I posted on Instagram, and eventually I found someone who also had a Remington Streamliner who could walk me through what was missing. So big shout out to Bulldozer Typewriter, because I would not be here today without you. He sent me some photos of his Remington Streamliner after he had removed the top carriage of this machine and showed me that I was missing a little connector piece between these two. Just a little bent piece of metal that connects them so as you're pressing a key, it can remove kind of that stopper and let your escapement move one space at a time rather than kind of getting stuck in that place and then always getting your carriage stuck or being completely removed and letting your carriage spin out. So he sent me some pictures, and based on these photos, I did something interesting. I typically have like bags of typewriter parts for machines I've taken apart, but I've kind of picked those over quite a bit, and I haven't bought a new parts machine in a while. And I didn't have any connector pieces that were the right dimensions. He measured it for me, the distance. So what I did was I took a paper clip and I bent it all the way straight, and then I measured it to his specifications and just started bending the edges a little bit to try and make sure that I could connect these two pieces. So I made my own typewriter piece using a paper clip. I then put this piece in place and I had to finagle it a little bit. It wasn't exactly the right length. I had to make a couple different variations of it. It took me a while to get the right spacing and the right length on this piece so that as one section moved, it would move another section out of the way in tandem and keep that escapement moving freely. I was able to place the carriage back on and kind of through memory and lots of reference photos, get everything back on top of the carriage, except for a platen knob, which took me a really long time to get back on. In fact, it took me 3 days to figure out how to get a singular screw back in this platen knob. And eventually I figured it out, only to realize that the piece that I had made had slipped off of the section it was supposed to be on, so I had to take it apart again and put it back together again. That is something I've learned over the years doing some of these typewriter repairs when I don't know what I'm doing. I often have to take the typewriter apart 3 or 4 times because I just don't get it right the first time. So I'd put everything back together, but I still didn't have the rollers right. I had to go back in, take it apart another time. It really wasn't feeding paper through. I switched the rollers around. I tried a few things. Eventually I was able to wiggle it into place and get it to kind of work. But there were still some other issues that I had on this typewriter. I had some sticky keys, which is often a complaint I hear from people as they have a typewriter, their keys get stuck. So I had to remedy that. And I had a broken clasp on the casing itself, the top cover. This is called an armor and shield design in the advertisements for Remington Streamliner. And the idea is like this top cover piece sits in and it has little spokes on the end of it that clip into the bottom of the Remington case. One of those had snapped off, which made the case kind of pull away as you were using the handle on it, so it wasn't very safe. So I had to fix both of these issues. I started by working on the case itself. I had some leftover resin from my bling typewriter project, so I took tinfoil and molded it to the other side of the case so that I had kind of a latch design, and then I taped it on with a knife for support to make it straight to the other side that was missing this clasp, and then filled it with resin, and then let it dry for 3 days. And it doesn't look great, and there's still tin foil on it, but this did solve the problem. It now gives me kind of those 2 key latch points on the Remington to attach the case to the top. But it still wasn't typing perfectly because I had those sticky keys. So I decided, after trying to clean out these sections, the only thing that I could really do was take out my type slugs and clean it out. This is an extra step in the process, but when things get stuck or sticky and no amount of just like drizzling rubbing alcohol or lighter fluid or any of like your cleaning solutions on the top, when that doesn't work, you kind of have to go deeper. Now your type slugs are going to be attached to the actual keys, so you will have to take them out of these latch pieces. Typically it's just a little bent piece of metal that has a hook on it, and you just unhook your type slug from that hook. I removed all of the type slugs to where I had like the stickiest keys. I removed them, I cleaned them with mineral spirits. I made sure to brush them down with a wire brush so there's nothing like sticky or getting stuck in the tracks. I cleared out the tracks with mineral spirits. I air compressed everything and then put it all back together, and that fixed my sticky key problem. So that's a trick I do when I have sticky keys and the simple cleaning isn't working. You can go a little bit deeper, and it's not very difficult as long as you keep everything organized. So I did that, and then I was able to get the bottom of the case back on and get that dreaded screw back in the platen knob after a lot of tries. I will say I do like the aesthetics of this machine. I love the look of these 60s and 70s machines. They're very compact looking, they're kind of streamlined, a little bit space agey, they come in cool colors, but there are some disadvantages to having machines from this era. I find time and time again these are really difficult to work on. The pieces are stacked on top of each other because they're trying to be more compact. The materials are different. Often these have more plastic components to them than metal, which can lead to more breaking or cracking over time. They're just not built well to last. Like metal machines are heavier, these ones are a little bit more lightweight and a little bit more liable to break. The typing experience on this is nice. I do like typing on it. I'm running into the same issue I had though on some of my other Remington typewriters, where the edges of the keys, because they are square shaped, are a little bit rough on my fingers. I get yelled at all the time in the comment section that I'm not touch typing because I don't know how to touch type. And I'm a Hunt and Peck typewriter user. I know that's not preferred. Unfortunately, that's how I type. And I do get my fingers quite often beat up on the sides by using these square-shaped keys on the Remingtons. So for me, the user experience isn't necessarily the nicest. It's not the softest feel. It is a little bit wiggly in the carriage. There is one section in the carriage as you go over the middle where you can just feel there's a little bit of slop. That could be adjustments that I have done incorrectly. That could be the design of the machine. It's not perfect in that casing. So I can feel that a little bit in the carriage. The font is fine, the feel of it is fine, the general shape and construction is okay once you have it working. It does tend to slide a little bit. That's why I like using a mat with some of these, just because they are not heavy enough to weight themselves down to keep themselves from sliding while typing. Overall, it's a nice little machine. It's just not the hardiest typewriter I've ever had. And another big issue I have with Remingtons, and why I've actually sold most of my Remingtons, is the ribbons. I really struggle with the ribbons on Remingtons, the Remington ribbons, the ribbons on Remingtons. They are not your typical universal replacement. The ribbon size is exactly the same, but the spools on these Remingtons themselves is very different. Instead of having like a universal replacement you snap in, these have little top cover pieces that you take out, and then it's just the ribbon attached to a little ring on the center post of the ribbon mechanism. So I had to completely remove a ribbon from a universal replacement and wrap it around this central post ring on the Remington typewriter. You can do that as long as you have those central post rings. If you don't have those, they can be kind of hard to track down. So that is a limitation here with Remingtons. Their ribbon mechanism is not my favorite. It is important then to have the spool cover caps to put back on top of it. It makes it look like a normal ribbon, but it also keeps your ribbon in place. If you don't have those, the ribbon has a tendency to slide up, and it can leave ink stains on the bottom of the inside of your top cover or make your ribbon not work perfectly as you're using it. With projects like this, I found the best thing that I can do is be really patient. I have wanted a typewriter like this, I wanted to experience it, and I also did not want to be limited by my own mechanical skills. So crowdsourcing information and help when you're working on these projects is really important. That's why I encourage everyone to be part of the Big Typewriter group on Facebook and also part of the maintenance group on Facebook. When you're running into trouble, posting a picture of or a video of something that's wrong in your typewriter can lead you to get the right answer. Somebody might not always know exactly what it is, but something they say might help you in your process of trying to fix machines like this. And I think the other thing I learned here is just because a machine looks a little intimidating or might have something on it that's a little beyond my skill set, it doesn't mean that it's not worth attempting. I wasn't going to feel bad if I messed up this typewriter while working on it or couldn't get it back together. It was a $15 machine, they're not well liked, it was pretty cheap. So I knew I wasn't going to get into too much trouble if this turned into a disaster. But I also realized that working on this, it is something that I can fix if I'm patient, if I'm organized, and I'm not afraid to ask for help. So this was a big deal for me, being able to work on this machine. This is a little bit further than my skill set, but I definitely feel more confident working on projects like this in the future. And I am excited to test this machine a little bit more and decide if it's going to break that Remington curse for me. I still haven't found a Remington that I need to keep. So maybe this one will be it. If you've had any interesting repair stories, leave them down below in the comments. What are your #1 repair tips? We're always trying to share information here. And if you're new to typewriter repair, you can always check the comment sections on these videos. There are lots of helpful people down there as well. So if you ever have questions, someone will know the answer and we will get you to that person. If you're interested in more typewriter content, I do have some other videos on this YouTube channel, and I also have an Instagram at just.my.typewriter. And thank you all so much for watching, and remind you, you're just my type writer.